As League of Legends prepares for Season 8, we have 5 preset trees in this preseason to give us some different options. Now, as you can see, I already have 4 trees here. The first 2 you're given right off the bat, but I actually spent my blue essence, or at least some of my blue essence, to buy 2 more trees, or 2 more rune pages. And I think given the options I chose, compared to the options were given in the presets, my choices were perfectly valid. While the preset trees do have some uses, each one of them has its flaws that make them decent enough until you're able to afford a rune page. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at the 5 preset pages in order to tell you what's good and what's not so good about them. In case you're wondering about my 4 pages that I've created, I'll be looking at those in a different video, so stay tuned. So first off, I'm going to look at Resolve the Colossus. Now, as you can clearly see, 3 of my rune pages work using Resolve as their primary page, and in fact, what I'm calling the Healer Girls tree goes Resolve and then Sorcery, just like Resolve the Colossus. But the options I chose were a little different. So here's how Resolve the Colossus works. You have Grasp of the Undying, which is really good for giving you bonus damage and some healing in lane. I find this to be a really good ability for a character like Garen or Darius or Tryndamere, characters who are tanky, but tanky in the top lane and need a little bit of sustain in the early game and a little bit of extra damage in the early game. So, and not only that, it increases your maximum health, which will help you in the late game. Resolve the Colossus also has Unflinching, which gives you bonus tenacity when you either use a summoner spell or while it's on cooldown. As you can see here, after you cast summoner spell, for 15 seconds you gain tenacity and slow resistance, and then while they're on cooldown, that 15% lowers to 10%. This is really cool, but when you're using it on like a tank support, for example, tanky support, it's not as good. If you're going for, say, a brawler or kind of just a top lane tank, this is probably more up your alley. Iron Skin, I think, is definitely a good choice. While Mirror Shell isn't as good and is probably better on a champion like Galio, Iron Skin and Conditioning are both really good abilities, Iron Skin being better in the early game or if you're in the bot lane. Meanwhile, Conditioning being actually really good late game, so I actually don't have any problem with the choice of Iron Skin over Conditioning because they're both really good. Then we have Overgrowth to give you maximum health whenever a minion or monster dies near you. This is actually kind of cool because if you're able to clear out waves, which isn't really the best ability of a tank, but if you're able to clear out waves, you're going to get more health. If you miss kills, if you miss minion kills, that is, you're still getting bonus health. Overgrowth is actually pretty nice. Basically, this whole idea is about stacking health and resistances. But then it adds on Sorcery for the abilities Nullifying Orb to give you a magic shield, kind of similar to a Blitzcrank passive. This is really good because it helps balance out the Iron Skin. Iron Skin will give you more armor. Nullifying Orb will help give you some magic resist, or at least a magic shield. And it has a cooldown of being able to use once per minute, which is actually a lot better than Blitzcrank's current passive. Then we also have Scorch. Scorch is once every 20 seconds, it gives you basically a mini burn effect, kind of like Liandry's Torment or Ignite. This will help give you some, just some extra damage, and can help cancel out the health regeneration effects of other top tanks. I would say this is a really good tree, but again, you have to be able to have the right kind of character for it. Like I said, this would be really good for a character like Garen or Darius or Tryndamere, someone who does put out some damage, but basically you want them to be the big guy who can just take a ton of damage. I personally have a different preference for how I portray my tanks, using in my tree that I call the Mighty Glacier, but I'm going to talk more about that in a later video. Next up, we're looking at Domination, the Executioner. This is a really good tree as well, but it doesn't really fit my preferences for how I would go down the domination path, if I did. This tends to be more of a assassin or burst mage, in my opinion, kind of tree. Or at least, well, it's definitely more of the assassin jungler tree, but it doesn't really do what I think is best in the tree. Um, it has Electrocute, which is basically Thunderlords. So this is a really good ability. And in fact, it even says, we called them Thunderlords for to speak the lightning was to invite disaster. Yeah, Electrocute is a really good ability, and it was phenomenal for characters in Season 7 and Season 6. Cheap Shot's kind of nice because it adds some true damage. Ghost Poro is really good, especially if you're a jungler, because while you're waiting in the bush, you can get some vision, and then sneak back to that bush after you get the kill, to the bush that you have vision in. And Ravenous Hunter gives you just some extra healing. It's some extra life steal, extra spell vamp, I guess, basically. It's good, but it also requires a lot more of that assassin playstyle that I don't really play. It also gives you Triumph, which, if you, it's not like you needed more regeneration, but Ravenous Hunter stacks well with Triumph, and helps give you some extra gold for those expensive items that you want. And then Coup de Grace to give you plus 10 damage to champions at low health. So yeah, this really is, and you can basically tell from the name anyway, this really is the assassin page. I think that if you're playing an assassin, this is really good, though some items like maybe Relentless Hunter, or maybe Predator, or Dark Harvest might be more up your alley. Also, Alacrity is pretty nice as well, as is Bloodline. So, I mean, you're giving up the ability to customize for a very streamlined page. I can understand why it's good, I just don't think it's worth using on one of my characters that I main. Precision the Perfect, which I think really should have been named the Perfect Shot, is actually a really good page as well. We have Press the Attack, which basically helps give some vulnerability, kind of similar to the Brittle idea, which is kind of cool. It also has Triumph. Again, Triumph is just a great skill, and it's definitely worth taking. Overheal is kind of nice, especially if you're an ADC. And Presence of Mind is kind of nice too. But it's definitely more of a ability for someone like Sivir, or maybe like Caitlyn. Triumph is definitely the most general, and I think the most... it covers the most champions, as opposed to the other two, which are a little more specialized. And like I said before, Alacrity and Coup de Grace are both just really good. What I don't necessarily like is that it has Gathering Storm and Celerity. Celerity, it's kind of weird because it says any additional movement speed. It says add 8% of your bonus movement speed to AP or AD that's adaptive. I don't really know that many champions that stack movement speed except for Janna and Janna, Hecarim, and maybe Yasuo. Or unless you're playing like a really niche build like Racecar Veigar or Racecar Teemo. I don't really know. Again, if you're playing like Janna or Hecarim or Yasuo, I think Celerity is really good. But I think you're better off going with either like Absolute Focus or maybe Transcendence. Transcendence is just a phenomenal skill. And then you have Gathering Storm. Gathering Storm, of course, being just phenomenal in the late game. This is really good for your champions like Veigar, Thresh, and Nasus, who are great late game. Personally, I don't really like Water Walking, but I guess on that tier it's arguably better for the earlier game, especially if you're playing like a support character. And Scorch, I think, would probably be a little bit better because they would give you some on-hit damage. I don't know, if you're playing an ADC, this would be really good. But, I don't know, there's some things that I think don't work as well, especially the use of the sorcery tree. I don't think sorcery works as well with precision, but that's just my opinion. Next up, I'm looking at Sorcery the Calamity. This is another one that has some options that are good, but options I don't like as much. It uses Arcane Comet, which is basically kind of like I believe it's similar to a Xerath. I think it's a Q and or no, it's a Xerath W and I think it's a Vagar E. Just kind of that delay, or even like a Soraka Q. It hurls damage down in an area of effect, but it has a delay, so you have to kind of time it really well. Arcane Comet's kind of weird, especially considering that it has a cooldown of actually, let's see, it has a interesting. I mean, it does have some cooldown reduction. It's kind of weird. I don't know. It has a 20-second cooldown at the start, so it's yeah. I don't know. You have to be really good at timing in order to get Arcane Comet to work well. Meanwhile, Phase Rush is similar similar to Electrocute in that you just need to have consecutive hits. And I just really like Summon Area. It's so good on characters like Sona and Zyra and Morgana. Mana Flow Band is kind of like a really long cooldown Lysandra passive, or I guess kind of similar to a Nunu passive. If you like the ability Mana Flow Band, go for it, but I personally like Ultimate Hat a little bit more. Nullifying Orb is also pretty good, like we saw in the previous tree, but I think might be a little bit better on some tankier champions that you just want to give a little bit of a buff to. Transcendence is a good choice, and Gathering Storm really requires you to be late game, but chances are, if you're playing an AP mid, or even just a mage in general, you're going to want to go late game to get to get a ton of AP. So I guess it works. I'm not a big fan of Eyeball Collection, mostly just because I prefer Zombie Ward, and I'm not a big fan of Relentless Hunter because it gives movement speed when you're out of combat. I personally prefer Ingenious Hunter, giving you active item CDR. That'd be really good for items, especially if you have a Hourglass, Zonia's Hourglass. It also works on trinkets, which is really nice because I can stack up to 40% cooldown reduction, which, assuming you have the 5 Bounty Hunter stacks. And, I mean, while I'm not a big fan of Ravenous Hunter I personally like more than Relentless Hunter. So again, this is one of those things where it's just like the secondary tree isn't as good, or at least the choices it has selected I don't like as much, and then I'm just not really a big fan of the keystones. And last but not least, we have Inspiration the Timeless. And I'll be honest, I am not a big fan of Inspiration. I mean, I realize I use some Inspiration in the Mighty Glacier build, but I don't know. I think of the 5 trees, the five trees, Inspiration is kind of, I don't know, the least interesting. Trading out basically free or early items in exchange for just less base stats or less passive effects. The Timeless gives you the ability to switch out summoner spells, which sounds really cool, but is not. I don't think it's going to be used as often as a lot of people think. I mean, if you early game start off as a jungler and then late game switch to just a carry or something, and if you want to trade out your smite for something, well, just pick a smite upgrade that works for your playstyle. If you decide, oh, I don't want exhaust after all, and I want heal instead because it works better late game, or instead of switching out exhaust, say, for ignite, just do that instead. I mostly use exhaust early game to help me out until CC gets better, but I mean, I kind of half the time forget that my summoner spells are there except for flash. I do like Biscuit Delivery. It's a really cool ability, as well as Cosmic Insight. I definitely think either Cosmic Insight or Magical Footwear are a good secondary ability. I'm not as big of a fan of Futures Market. You have to wait, and you can go into debt, but generally you just have to plan your build better. I mean, if you can afford either one item or the other that builds into the same item, like let's say you're trying to get let's say you can either afford a healing charm or a ruby crystal, both of which build into the same kind of item. Just get the one you can afford. Or it's like if you can, like if you're, for example, if you're getting boots, If you can either afford Boots of Speed or Cloth Armor, get one of them and then just save up your gold to get the other. Yeah, I don't know. I find futures market to just be kind of like for people who are just really impatient. And as someone who, has basically for someone who is used to going into the late game and used to waiting for items, I've learned to be patient with gold. So I'm just not a big fan of this ability. Much rather have magical footwear. And then I find the minion dematerializer to be pretty bad. And of course, once again, we have a tree that offers some weird examples. Iron Skin is a good ability, but I don't know why these were chosen. Overgrowth, again, is pretty good, but I'm trying to figure out what the purpose or what kind of character would use this tree. I don't know, it's really weird. It's like, can't decide on a summoner spell? All of them. Can't decide on an item? Just buy it early. And then, like, I don't know, I can't figure out what character this tree is designed for, because it's just so general. I mean, I guess it could potentially be used for a tanky-ish, for a tanky top, or maybe for like a character like Gnar or Gangplank up top to help get them their items earlier. I don't know. It's so general that I just think it's kind of, well, to be fair, kind of useless, because it doesn't really give enough of a bonus to what you really need. I don't know, that's just why I'm not a big fan of Inspiration. I think it's too general and better as like a secondary tree. Anyway, those are my opinions on the 5 preset pages. Resolve is actually pretty decent, but it kind of gives some weird damage for tanks. Executioner, I'm sure is great, but I just don't play assassins, so I wouldn't use it. Precision is pretty decent, but the secondary choices in sorcery I'm not a fan of. And same thing with sorcery choosing domination, and just the fact that the inspiration tree for the timeless even exists. It's just so random that I don't get, again, what the point is. So those are my opinions on the preset pages. I mean, if you use them, great. If you don't, and you end up building 3 different resolve trees like I did, that's fine too. Let me know in the comments below what you think of the preset pages, and maybe I'll change my mind if you have some good rationale. Until next time, I've been MetaGrowStreak, and thanks for watching.